Alexander, and I'm co-organizer of Symfony Meetup together with Tracy. We're doing this for almost a year now. So Meetup was spread across 12 months. We had a couple of breaks. The idea behind this meetup is that we want to leverage the power of the community. It all started after the keynote of Cole Evans at PHP Sofia in 2016, when she was telling that in order to support open source, there is much more than writing code. There is bug fixing, there is bug reporting, documentation, and even organizing meetup. And we were really impressed about how they managed to bring together almost 500 developers in the capital of Bulgaria. So because we were a little bit envy on the guys from Sofia, we decided to organize this meetup monthly in Bucharest too. So we're meeting on the first Thursday of each month. This is an exception, made mostly because of the 1st of March and the US Day of March. But yeah, here we are today. I took my notes on my phone, so I have to read them. Usually we are talking about Symfony-related topics. Tonight we are going to talk about life after aesthetics. Before going in a little bit into presenting our tonight's presentation, I want to thank Mark for helping us with the organization of this event. They are sponsors of this meetup and many others in the past and in the future, hopefully. The Wi-Fi is written over there. I don't know it by heart, but if anybody needs it, can actually use it for Ghana. The bathroom is nearby the elevators, and pretty much that's it with the meetup. The program will be an hour of presentations. Aruka will join us and talk about life after aesthetics. We'll have a short pizza break, and afterwards we are going to gather around here and do the open space and conference we are always doing for meetup right now. I'll tell you more about that after pizza. What I would like you to think about topics we can discuss after that, and bring to the table problems you are facing on a daily basis, solutions you have found and you want to share with your peers, and why not even ask questions that pop to your mind during the presentation. As I was saying to you, tonight we are going to listen to Raluca from Zitec talking about her life as a programmer, as a Symfony developer after aesthetics. As you all know, aesthetics is no longer the recommendation of Symfony in terms of asset management. So I want to welcome Raluca from Zitec to start her presentation.
Thanks. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Raluca Kurciuc and I'm a software engineer at Zitec. And as you already know, today I'll talk about life after aesthetic. We've recently stopped using aesthetic on our project. So today I want to talk about my experience of implementing this feature, what problems we had, and how we solved them. So let's start talking a little bit about my project. I'm working on an admin management application, which is built on Symfony 3.2 and Backbone.js. And my favorite part about this project is that the front-end and the back-end components are totally separated, which means we write a lot of JavaScript code. And because we're using Backbone, we have lots of classes, models, collections, views, and we had to structure them into our bundles. Into our bundles and not to write them directly to the public web folder. So that was the moment when Aesthetic came into our lives and into our project. Aesthetic is a Symfony bundle that manages your assets. The assets are usually the JavaScript, CSS, and images files of your website. And as I already told you in the initial phase of our project, we've used Ascetic. This is the very first project where I'm using Symfony and Ascetic, and I thought it was a really good tool for asset management because it really does the job of a front-end tool like Gulp or Grant. So I want to present you the pros and the cons of using Ascetic that I observed while I was using it. So some of the pros. Ascetic loads your assets from anywhere in your project, usually from your bundles, to the public web directory. And it knows how to apply some filters between serving your files to your website. Filters like SAS, less, uglify, and so on. So it has methods to minify and to combine your assets, which is something that usually you do with another front-end tool. So you basically have this, you can have these features without touching a line of JavaScript, which is pretty cool. Another thing that I really enjoyed was that the setup is very simple. You have to simply install the bundle with Composer, register it to your bundles, and add your settings to your config file, which is again pretty cool. You can load multiple files together in a single HTTP request, and it's very easy to manage cache busting. And now I will share with you some examples of the pros that I mentioned. This is how you can load multiple files with Ascetic. You have to simply write the files URLs into a JavaScript code block, and Ascetic will know how to load them in a single request. This is how you can use filters with Ascetic. In this example, it's used uglify.js for minifying your JavaScript files. Again, it's a very simple setting. Managing cache busting with Ascetic is again very simple. You just have to enable the cache busting worker, like in this example. And after that, every time you run the command to dump your assets, it will automatically add version to your files. You don't have to do any additional steps. You don't have to add the version when you load your files. And it works really well when you have one server, but our problem was that we have two servers on our production environment, and it has a well-known version consistency problem. And I left there a link to the GitHub issue if you're interested to read more, but I also tell you more in a few minutes about this problem. Let's see some of the cons of using Ascetic. First of all, we didn't have full control of how Ascetic can work. For example, you may already know that Ascetic doesn't support React or Vue.js, which are two technologies that we really want to start implementing and using more in our company. So for example, if we wanted to create a new page and use Vue.js on it, we couldn't do it with Ascetic. Another con is that there are more popular tools, which translates to a better support. And as I already said, we had a big compatibility issue with our production environment configuration because of the version consistency problem. And now let's see exactly what problems did we want to solve when we thought of switching from Ascetic to another tool. So on our production environment, we have one load balancer and two servers. The problem was that when a client requested the same asset multiple times, there were chances that one server could not load the file because it couldn't find the name. The reason was that Ascetic, with the cache busting worker, generated different file names for each server for the same asset, which was obviously a very big problem for our project, especially because we have all our functionality built on JavaScript. We had to find a very quick solution, so we enabled sticky session on production. That means that we made our load balancer to remember which server responded the first time when a client made a request. And after that, every time that client made other requests, the same server responded. It was a good temporary fix, but it was not a long-term solution because we couldn't use our production servers at the full capacity. Another thing that we wanted to solve, or better said, to improve, was to minify and to combine our assets. We haven't had a chance to do this on our production environment, so we really wanted to improve the performance of our application. We chose Gulp, so now I want to tell you more about how was this process of switching from Ascetic to Gulp in our project. First of all, why Gulp? We had already used it in our project to solve some problems with some images URLs in our CSS files. I know that this can be also solved with Ascetic, but we chose to solve the problem with Gulp. It's a more popular tool and it has better support. And last but definitely not least, it was a good choice for the requirements of our project. And I really think that when we want to introduce a new technology on the project that we're working, we have to take some time and to analyze what problems we want to solve and what requirements we have. So the requirements of our project were to minify and to combine our assets to improve the performance of our application, to continue to do the main job of Ascetic, which was to move the files to our bundles into the public web directory, to continue to manage the cache busting problem, and because we were about to load the minified and combined assets on our production environment, we wanted to generate source maps to have a way to debug easily on the production. And now I want to show you some real-life examples of how we implemented these requirements. And let's see some code. I really hope I won't bore you. These are the libraries that we use. As you can see, we have some libraries to fix the problem with the images URLs in the CSS files. We have libraries to combine and to minify our assets. And we have gulprev to manage the cache busting problem by adding revisions to our files, and sourcemap for generating source maps. And now let's see the Gulp task that does all the magic in our project. So we created a task, SSDown, that has another dependency task that simply deletes all the existing assets from our server. We store all the JavaScript file URLs into an array, and we'll add them in the correct order, in the order we wanted them to be loaded. We initialize the source maps, and after that, we combine all our JavaScript files into a script.min.js file. We minify the file, add the file revision with ref method from gulprev library. We write the source maps, and after that, we move the script.min.js file into the public web directory. Then we create a manifest JSON file to manage the cache busting problem. And after that, we dump it to the project root. And that's pretty much all the code we wrote for the JavaScript files. And it's almost the same for the CSS part. So it's pretty easy. This is the task that deletes the existing assets because we didn't want to store on our server the old versions of our files. Let's see how we manage the cache busting with Gulp and Symfony. So, as I already presented, we created a manifest file, and it has the correspondence between my asset and its name with the revision, that unique hash. And now it was about time to think how to add that version when we load our asset, because Ascetic knew how to do it automatically. So what we did was to create a twig extension for the asset version, which simply reads the asset name from the manifest JSON file. And after that, every time we were loading an asset that needed to be versioned, we added the twig extension at loading. I left there also a tutorial that helped me very much. It is a very detailed one, so if you ever need to create something like that, you can check this link. Surf maps. I really wanted to talk a little bit about the surf maps because I heard of them for the first time when I implemented this feature, and I really think they are very useful. So basically, as I told you, now in the production environment, we are loading a few JavaScript and CSS files that are combined and minified from other smaller files. And because we generated the source maps, we can see them very pretty in the Google Chrome Developer Console. And we can also see the code without being minified. So it's very easy to debug and to see where a console error comes from. So I really think they are pretty useful, and we hope we won't have too many reasons to use them on our production. But it's better to prevent than to fix quickly a bug on your prod. How was this process for us? For me, it was full of challenges because, as I said, it's the first project that I'm working with Symfony and aesthetic, so I had to understand very well the role of aesthetic in our project because I had to replace them with another tool. It was not that hard, technically speaking, because I'm familiar with JavaScript and I had a chance to work with Gulp before. But I think that for someone who is more familiar with aesthetic than with JavaScript, it can be a learning curve. The hardest part for me was to load the files in the correct order because we use a lot of objects and we trigger and dispatch a lot of events. So understanding how loading JavaScript files work was a very big challenge for me. And of course, testing our application was very hard because we had to test every page, every form, every grid, not only once, but twice, because we had to test it simulating the development and the production environment. How is our life after aesthetic? It's faster because we now load minified and combined assets on our production, so we improve a little bit the performance of our application. We now have full control of how our asset management system works, so that's great. We disabled the sticky session because, as I already told you, it was only a temporary fix for our problem. And what's great is that we can now use our production server configuration at its full capacity. And because we generated the source maps, we can now easily debug on production. And Google Chrome Developer Console is our best friend. How we load assets on our environments in this moment. So on our development environment, we continue to load the assets individually, but we're not using aesthetic anymore. We load them using Symfony. For the production, we load only 3 large JavaScript files and 2 CSS1. We wanted to structure our code, and we separated the libraries code from our custom code. So we have libmin.js and libmin.css for JavaScript and CSS libraries code, scriptmin.js and scriptmin.css for our custom CSS code and library CSS code, and backbone.min.js is a JavaScript file that has only 1 line of code, which does the backbone initialization. And it had to be added after all the JavaScript code was loaded. So that's why this line is in a separate file. How does the future sound for us? Well, it sounds great since Symfony stopped using aesthetic. As you may already know, Symfony 4 introduces Webpack and Core, which is similar to Gulp, and it also supports React and Vue.js and also loading JavaScript modules. And we're planning to update the Symfony 4 in the future, but we're not thinking about switching from Gulp to Webpack and Core because now we have full support, full control of our asset management system, and we don't have any good reasons to make the switch again. So basically, I think we'll use Gulp for a long time from now on. So that was my presentation. I think it was a lot quicker than when I rehearsed at home. But now, if you have questions, I'm here to answer. Any questions? We use Jenkins for deploying on our production and on our dev environment. So every time a deploy is made for production, we run the command. So that's all.
I would like to rephrase a little bit the previous question.
Okay.
And, help you out a little bit by asking you what happens after you make the commit of your, I don't know, you have to modify one line of JavaScript. And
Okay.
You're doing that commit. What are the steps until that line reaches production, and how have you integrated Gulp in this deployment pipeline, either manually
Okay,
or
so when I am developing something on my local machine, we load each file individually, so I don't have to run the Gulp command. When we deploy, we first deploy in our development environment, and after that, after all the testing and client approval.
So do you have a build process that automatically compiles everything and deploys it with a tool like?
Yes, we're using Ansible in Jenkins. Yes, and the commands are run by default at deploy.
So you back everything into a zip file that is then moved to the server, or
no?
Everything happens on the server.
Everything happens at deploy. I don't know exactly. Yes.
So you have rolling updates. Yes, so you have like a staging and then you switch folders. Yes. We have a sync system, so when the build process is done, we simply switch to sync current file. Okay. I'm asking this because our first major challenge of switching from Ascetic to Gulp was that we required Node.js on the servers that were used mainly for PHP. And we had to put them in Node.js is so good with package management, version management. Yeah, we have Node.js. So you had to have it, and this was already there. What's the choice? NPM on the server rather than building an artifact and deploying the artifact directly. For the choice because it was faster, I think. One more question for you, if possible. You were saying that switching to Gulp helps you to move files into the web folder. Were you keeping them in the app folder or in the source? And I'm talking about JavaScript.
Yes, I understand. We keep our assets into our bundle, so in the source file folder, and Ascetic moved them automatically in the web folder, and we did that with Gulp when we switched.
Still keeping them in your bundle?
Yes, because we want them to be structured.
Okay. Isn't that hard for the front-end guys?
We are the front end guys.
What front-end guys?
We are the full stack guys. Yes.
I have another question. How do you handle development versus production loading capacity? So you mentioned that on development you load the files directly.
Mhm.
So what? You just have like if temp equals
Yes.
if,
Yes.
then script line.
We have that if in our base tweak.
Okay.
And we created two code blocks in Twig, and we add the assets in that. And if we are on development, those will be loaded. But if we are on production, only that block of code will be loaded.
Ever happened like someone to add the script into the code block that is in base tweak, base HTML tweak, and forgot what is in the JS files array that was in Gulp file
I
broke production because he forgot to add the script there?
we have a staging environment,
Okay.
which is very similar to with our production environment. So before we deploy on our production, we deploy on staging, and there's another round of testing there. So we can find those kind of bugs.
Because one good thing with the static was that it works without developer intervention in development and production.
Yes.
For development, it was very slow because it broke the files. And when I used it last time, I used it as a controller, and basically all my assets were passing through a PHP file, a PHP controller from a bundle. But then again, when I deployed to production, I didn't have to do anything.
You had minified and combined the assets on our. We didn't have that before when we used the static. So.
I also did that. I was using UE and Java for compression and amplifying.
Okay.
But it was basically just running the settings up on production, and I had to have Java installed instead of Node.js. Thank you.
You're welcome. Can you repeat, please? No, we didn't do this. No, we haven't had a chance to verify that.
I think it's less flexible. And you always have to reload your Nginx config if you change something, and that makes things up. I think this is a good example of topic to discuss after Meetup, because we're using PHP, and I have some feedback with that. It's a necessary evil. Not necessary. It does a pretty good job in terms of page loading time on the client side, but kind of messes up with your files in a way that, as a developer, it's not a very friendly way, especially if you need to debug something that doesn't work. And that can be very browser specific, especially Internet Explorer. Edge or
I didn't do that before switching to Gulp, but I observed big differences between our production and our development environment using the same database. So, for example, the orders page was loading in 600 milliseconds, and on our production and on our development environment, it was more than 1 second, I think. So it was a difference, but I don't have. Yes. Yes. Okay. Yes, exactly. That was the hardest part of switching from aesthetic to gold because I had to be very careful on how I load the files. I simply added them and then test everything. And if I saw that the page is broken, yes. It was very difficult because we have a lot of events that are triggered and dispatched between the files. So the loading order was very important for that file. But it was trial and error. I don't have another answer for this. I don't know. I haven't heard of them. Any other questions? Thank you. Sta durata. Diciamo che super